5 decades, Grant Beaumont, known as Jim, lived with unimaginable grief. The father never gave up hope he'd once again see and hold his precious children.
It is so sad that Grant passed without that resolution.
It was on Australia Day in 1966 when Jim and Nancy Beaumont's 3 young children disappeared without a trace. Jane, aged 9, Arnna, aged 7, and Grant, aged 4, set off for a day at Glenelg Beach, never to be seen again. The family was thrown into the spotlight, pleading for their children's safe return.
I know many people all over Australia really feel for us, and what can you say at this moment? I mean, we've been hanging on for...
It was Australia Day, January 26, 1966, and the sun was already climbing high over Adelaide by 9 in the morning. The sky was pale and cloudless. A soft breeze swept in from the Gulf of St. Vincent. Families filled picnic baskets, kids dragged towels behind them, and the beach, Glenelg Beach, began to pulse with the careless freedom of summer. The Beaumont children had been there many times before. It was just a short bus ride from their home in Somerton Park, a safe, flat suburb with tidy lawns and neighbors who greeted each other by name. 9-year-old Jane, the eldest, was sensible beyond her years, careful, quiet, with a motherly way about her. 7-year-old Arnna was the bold one, outspoken and curious, the sort who asked questions twice and believed the first answer only half the time. And then there was Grant, just 4, all tousled blonde hair and little boy energy, the kind that bounced when he ran and sang when he shouldn't. That morning, they left the house at 10 a.m. with a few shillings, beach towels, and strict instructions from their mother, Nancy. Take the 10-minute bus ride to Glenelg, stay together, and be home by 2:00 p.m. The children had taken that bus before. Jane knew how to pay the fare, how to hold Grant's hand, how to keep an eye on Arnna. There was a routine to it, something almost comforting in its predictability. Nancy had once accompanied them, but over time she had come to trust their independence, especially Jane's maturity. This was the mid-60s. Children were expected to roam, to be back before supper, tanned and tired but safe to be. By 3 p.m., the children had not returned. Nancy waited by the door, checked the street, stepped outside. Her eyes swept the road again and again. At 3:30, Jim Beaumont, the children's father, arrived home from a business trip. Nancy ran to him, breathless, eyes wide, already knowing. Together they drove to Glenelg Beach. They searched the shoreline, checked the changing rooms, questioned lifeguards, wandered the jetty. By 5 p.m., they were at the Glenelg police station, reporting 3 missing children. What followed was the largest missing persons investigation in Australian history. That afternoon, as police swarmed Glenelg, officers began canvassing anyone who might have seen 3 children, 2 girls and a younger boy, sometime between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. It didn't take long for multiple witnesses to describe the same detail. A man, tall, thin, blonde, mid-30s, tan like he worked outdoors. He wore a blue swimsuit and was seen playing with the children, Jane, Arnna, and Grant, near the changing huts on the grass behind the beach. One woman said he seemed friendly, even fatherly. Another thought it odd that the children appeared to know him, but they didn't. Nancy and Jim Beaumont had never heard of such a man. They weren't the type to casually hand their children off to strangers. And Jane, so cautious, so mature, wouldn't go with someone she didn't trust. So how did this man earn their trust? A vendor at Wenzel's Cake Shop, located on Jetty Road, just a short walk from the beach, told police she had seen the 3 children earlier that day. Jane had purchased a meat pie, 2 pastries, and a bottle of fizzy drink. But what stunned investigators was that the purchase didn't match the money Nancy had given them. Someone must have given them extra. Someone must have been with them. The woman behind the counter remembered Jane clearly because she paid with a £1 note. Nancy had only given her coins. There was something else. The shopkeeper said the children appeared happy, not afraid, not distressed. The man wasn't with them inside the store, but she had the distinct feeling that he was nearby, perhaps just outside the door. And then there was the dog. Another beachgoer claimed the children had a small dog with them and were playing with it alongside the man in the blue swimsuit. But the Beaumonts didn't own a dog. If that sighting was accurate, then the man had possibly used the animal to engage with the kids, a classic lure. It fit with the way predators operated, though the term stranger danger wasn't yet part of public vocabulary. Not in 1966.by that night. Headlines had already hit the presses. 3 children missing from Glenelg. The country reacted with shock. Children didn't go missing from public beaches in broad daylight. Not 3 at once. Not in a single moment. Police launched a massive search effort. Glenelg Beach was shut down. Hundreds of officers scoured the sand, the ocean, the drains, the boat sheds. Divers were sent underwater. Sniffer dogs worked the dunes. Local residents opened sheds and garages. The army even joined in. But there was nothing. No towel, no shoes, no bag, no sign of a struggle. The children were simply gone, and so was the man. The following days became a blur of search parties, news bulletins, and door-to-door interviews. Police questioned anyone who had been near the beach that day. They brought in sketch artists. A composite was drawn, a tall, lean man with blonde hair and sharp features. Some said he was smiling. Others said his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. That it didn't take long for the theory to settle. This wasn't random. The man hadn't stumbled upon the children. He had been watching them, studying their routines. He knew they came to Glenelg. He may have spoken to them on previous days. Built trust slowly. Groomed them, not with force, but with familiarity. Jane, ever cautious, wouldn't go with just anyone. But what if he had earned her trust before? A chilling detail emerged. A few weeks earlier, Arnna had made a strange comment to her mother. She said, "Jane has a boyfriend down the beach." Nancy had laughed it off, assuming it was just childish teasing. But now, those words echoed like a warning. If someone had been approaching the children before January 26th, it meant this. Wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. The public panic deepened. Families stopped letting children out alone. Beaches emptied. Adelaide shifted overnight from a city of sun-soaked freedom to one of locked doors and nervous glances. The idea that someone could take 3 children and leave no trace was more than disturbing. It was destabilizing. Parents became suspicious of strangers, of neighbors, of anyone. Police were flooded with tips. False leads poured in. Psychics called in visions. Letters arrived claiming responsibility. One man wrote claiming to have the children and demanding a ransom. The note was cruelly detailed and completely fake. Police tracked him, arrested him, and exposed it as a hoax. But the damage lingered. Every false lead twisted the knife further into the Beaumonts' hearts. And then there was the most heartbreaking possibility, that the children were still alive, but being held somewhere. Quietly, far from the city, weeks turned into months. The beach grew silent. Glenelg became a place people visited with unease. A place forever changed by what it had allowed to disappear. The man in the blue swimsuit, the only real suspect, had no name, no vehicle identified, no address. He had walked into the beach crowds and melted into history, but he had taken something with him, something the country would never get back. By the end of 1966, the Beaumont children had been missing for nearly a year. Their photos were everywhere. Smiling school portraits of Jane, Arnna, and Grant became etched into the national memory. The police had followed over 1,000 leads, interrogated known sex offenders, and even consulted with international agencies. But nothing stuck. There was no forensic evidence. No witness ever came forward with a name. No body was found. In 1968, a new suspect gained quiet attention. Derek Percy, a known child killer with an eerie resemblance to the man described at Glenelg. He had murdered a child in Victoria in 1969 and was later ruled unfit to stand trial due to mental illness. He was a loner, intelligent, and had been in South Australia at the time of the Beaumonts' disappearance. Police interviewed him years later. He denied involvement. Nothing could place him directly at Glenelg on that day, and so the case sat. Not cold, never truly cold, but frozen in stasis. Investigators retired. New detectives came in. The file swelled. Tips continued to trickle. None cracked the silence. In the 1990s, the case took an unexpected turn. A man named Bevan Spencer von Einem, already in prison for the horrific murder of 15-year-old Richard Kelvin, became the focus of renewed interest. He was part of what some believed was a pedophile ring operating in Adelaide in the 1970s and 80s. He fit the age range. He had a history. He lived near Glenelg. There were whispers that Jane, Arnna, and Grant had been taken not by one man, but by a group. The idea was horrifying, that it hadn't been a solitary predator, but an organized ring, that the children might have been separated, used, killed, hidden, but there was no proof. Only theories. And then came the letters. In 1968, the Beaumont parents received a series of anonymous letters. The writer claimed to be holding the children and willing to return them. He instructed Jim Beaumont to bring a newspaper with a coded mark and wait at a certain location. Jim went. He waited for hours. No one came. Later, police discovered the letters were a cruel hoax, written by a university student who had no connection to the case. Jim was never the same after that. Neither was Nancy. They stayed married for years, but the grief drove a wedge through their lives. Eventually, they separated. Nancy moved to a different part of South Australia. Jim stayed in the Adelaide suburbs. Neither remarried. They never stopped hoping, but they stopped waiting by the door. The case would be reopened again and again. In 1996, then 2007, and again in 2013, when a dying man came forward with claims that the children had been buried in a factory site. Police excavated the location. Bones were found, but they belonged to animals. Hope rose and collapsed. Again and again. In 2013, the story took another turn. Not through forensics or confessions, but through whispers from a dying man and the fractured memories of a tormented past. Two brothers came forward. In separate interviews, they claimed that as young boys in 1966, they had seen something unforgettable. 3 children being buried in the yard of a now-abandoned factory in the Adelaide suburb of Plympton. The building had once belonged to a wealthy local businessman named Harry Phipps, known to his friends as a respectable figure, a World War II veteran, a community man, a quiet aristocrat in tailored suits. But his son told a different story. According to his estranged son, Phipps had a deeply disturbing side. He was known to cross-dress in private. He had a violent temper. He had abused boys. And he fit the physical description of the man in the blue swimsuit. The son, who had long severed ties with Phipps, also claimed that his father had been at Glenelg Beach that very day and that he might have known the children. He even suggested that Phipps had invited Jane into his home once before. The timing, the location, the wealth and privacy, it all suddenly aligned. And so, in 2013, nearly 5 decades after the children disappeared, detectives brought ground-penetrating radar to the Plympton factory yard. It was now an overgrown plot, empty and mostly forgotten, but its soil still held secrets. The radar revealed something below: anomalies, possible cavities, the kind of irregularities that made investigators pause. Still, nothing was done. Until 2016, when Channel 7's Sunday Night aired an explosive documentary. They named Harry Phipps publicly as the prime suspect. They interviewed the 2 men who had allegedly helped dig holes in his yard as teenagers, unaware at the time of what it was for. They returned with cameras to the same spot. And again, the ground-penetrating radar lit up. This time, police acted in late 2016. After over 50 years of grief, a backhoe arrived on site. Forensics teams swept the area. Soil was sifted. Bones, if any, would be brittle now, fragile as dried leaves. They dug for days, but they found nothing. No bones. No clothing. No trace of the Beaumont children. It was another collapse. Another moment when the country held its breath and then exhaled grief. Harry Phipps died in 2004. He was never formally charged, never questioned publicly. He took whatever truth he held to the grave. And still, the Beaumont case refused to rest. Before the Beaumont children vanished, it was not uncommon for Australian children to roam alone, to catch buses, walk to school, spend hours at the beach unaccompanied. The country prided itself on freedom, on safety, on trust, but everything changed after January 26, 1966. Parents no longer waved from the front step. They walked their children inside, sat in parked cars through lessons. The news bulletins no longer closed the day, they haunted it. Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont became the reason a generation of children grew up, watched, instructed, warned. Police forces around the country changed their procedures too. Missing child cases were treated with faster urgency. Public alerts, school safety reforms, Community education campaigns. The term stranger danger would enter the Australian vernacular in the decades to follow, and its roots could be traced to the single day when the sun rose on Glenelg Beach and set without. 3 young lives. The case also shifted something deeper, a kind of national innocence. The story remained in the news for decades. Books were written, documentaries produced. Every few years, new leads would rise. So would false hope, anonymous calls, psychic tips, even international sightings. There were reports of children matching the Beaumont's descriptions in New Zealand, in Tasmania, in South Africa. All dead ends. People still whispered about the man in the blue swimsuit. His face, never fully captured, lingered in the collective imagination, smiling, playing with children, walking calmly into a crowd and vanishing with them as if under a magician's cloak. Jim and Nancy Beaumont aged in quiet, steadfast pain. They never gave another child their name. They never closed the door fully to hope. For years, they kept their telephone number listed in case the children ever called. They kept the same house, the same rooms, the same routines, just in case that by the 2000s, Nancy had withdrawn from the public eye. Jim continued to speak with investigators, quietly, always with dignity, never with anger. When asked how he carried on, he once said, "You don't stop loving them because they're not in front of you. You just carry that love differently." In 2019, Jim Beaumont died at the age of 97. He passed away without ever learning what happened to his children, without ever seeing justice, without ever finding a grave to visit. Nancy, older now and silent in the public eye, lives with the weight of memory. The world moved on, but the country still remembers. Each year, on Australia Day, news outlets retell the story. The beach becomes a place of remembrance. And somewhere, in the minds of millions, that last photograph remains. Jane holding her brother's hand, Arnna smiling beside her. 3 children walking toward the sea, and never coming back. The Glenelg jetty still stands, weathered by time and tide, a place now both scenic and sacred. Tourists walk its length, some unaware of the tragedy tied to its shore. Others come deliberately, not to sunbathe, but to remember. On warm January mornings, flowers still appear near the shoreline. Anonymous, simple, pink carnations, child-sized sandals, notes written in aging cursive that say, "Never forgotten." The memory of Jane, Arnna, and Grant remains one of Australia's deepest scars, not only for the horror of what happened, but for what didn't. No resolution, no closure. The case remains officially unsolved. Open, but dormant. Reviewed, but unchanged. There were other moments when the world seemed to pause again. Waiting for justice. In 2013, detectives revisited the notes from that day at the beach, questioning the accuracy of the timeline. Some now believe the children may have boarded a second bus, the return trip, but were intercepted before they ever made it home. Others argue they never left the beach at all, that they were taken nearby and hidden in plain sight. There are theories, 1,000 of them, that the children were buried under a demolished warehouse, that they were placed aboard a boat, that they were smuggled out of the country by someone with means and motive. One theory, decades old, gained traction again, that the children were abducted by someone they already knew, perhaps even someone from their family's outer circle. The idea is chilling because it suggests that the crime was not just premeditated, but intimate, that the children smiled at their abductor, trusted him, followed him, and that they were never afraid, not until it was too late. The police files on the case fill entire cabinets. Over 1,000 suspects were reviewed, hundreds of tips analyzed, false confessions chased, dig sites examined. Not a single piece of physical evidence has ever surfaced. No clothing, no DNA, no confirmed possessions. They disappeared as if the world had allowed it. In 2022, the South Australian Police Commissioner reaffirmed their commitment to the case. He stated that the disappearance of the Beaumont children remains one of the agency's highest priorities. There is still a $1 million reward for information, still a phone number at the bottom of every flyer, still a hope, however faint, that someone, somewhere, knows something and is finally ready to speak. The public's relationship with the case has changed over the years. It is no longer just an unsolved crime. It has become a national ghost story, a generational legend, told in whispers and on documentaries. studied in criminology classes, carried by parents who now clutch their children's hands tighter than before. What remains, beyond the questions, is the image. 3. Children walking. A beach behind them, a sun overhead, and the silence of everything that came after.